The house on the corner of Maplewood Street had been standing for nearly 80 years. Its wooden siding had turned pale with age, the paint peeling in strips that fluttered. Whenever the autumn wind swept down the quiet road, children often raced their bicycles past it, slowing only to whisper to each other about the old man who lived inside. To them, he was a mystery. Someone who never came to block parties, never waved when families walked by, never joined the neighborhood church picnics. But to those who had lived in the town long enough, Mr. Raymond Carter was no mystery. He was 72 years old, a retired war veteran who had once worn his country's uniform with pride. He was also a widower. His wife, Martha, had died 12 years earlier, and though they had 2 grown children, both now lived far away, one in California and the other overseas. They called once every few weeks, sent holiday cards, but visits were rare. Mr. Carter's days were spent mostly in silence, the ticking of the old grandfather clock in his living room keeping him company. Emily Parker had noticed him many times before. She was 21, a student at the local community college, juggling part-time work at a coffee shop and taking care of her sick mother. She often passed his house on her way to the bus stop, but she never dared to wave or say hello. To her, he seemed like the kind of man who preferred solitude, and she respected that. That was until one chilly October afternoon. Emily had finished her shift at the cafe and was walking home, when she heard a sharp sound, the crack of wood splitting. She glanced toward Mr. Carter's yard and saw him struggling with a heavy axe, trying to chop firewood near the side of his garage. His movements were slower than she expected, his hands trembling slightly from age. Then it happened, and the axe slipped, and though he managed to avoid a serious accident, the blade scraped across his palm. Emily dropped her backpack and rushed through the open gate. "Sir, you're bleeding!" she cried. Mr. Carter looked startled at first, his eyes narrowing as if trying to recognize her. Blood trickled down his hand and he winced. "It's nothing," he muttered, gruff but weak. "Just a scratch." He could see it was more than a scratch. She quickly pulled a clean napkin from her bag, a habit she'd developed working at the cafe, and wrapped it around his hand. Her fingers were gentle but firm as she tied it tight enough to slow the bleeding. "You need to sit down," she said, glancing toward the porch. Without waiting for his protest, she guided him toward a chair by the front steps. Mr. Carter stared at her, confusion and a trace of embarrassment in his eyes. "I can handle myself, young lady. Been through worse." "I don't doubt that," Emily replied softly. "But you don't have to handle it alone." The words hung in the air, unexpected for both of them. Mr. Carter said nothing for a long moment, then sighed and leaned back in the chair, letting her fuss over his injury. Up close, Emily could see the lines on his face, deep creases, carved by years of hardship and grief. His eyes, though tired, were strikingly blue, carrying both weight and wisdom. She wondered how long it had been since anyone had really sat beside him like this. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice lower now, almost reluctant. "You're welcome," Emily answered. "Do you have a first aid kit inside?" He nodded, so she helped him inside the house. The living room smelled faintly of old wood and books. The shelves were lined with framed photographs, a woman with soft curls, smiling in a summer dress, 2 children standing proudly in graduation gowns, a younger version of Mr. Carter in uniform. Dust covered the frames as though no one had touched them in years. Emily found the kit and carefully cleaned and bandaged his wound. As she worked, Mr. Carter studied her curiously. "You live down the street, don't you?" he asked. "Yes, just 2 blocks away. My mom and I moved here a few years ago." He gave a slow nod. "I've seen you walk by. You always seem in a hurry." Emily smiled faintly. "That's life these days. School, work, taking care of home. Sometimes I feel like I'm running all the time." Mr. Carter's gaze drifted toward the photograph of his late wife. "I remember running once, too. Life doesn't slow down until it forces you to." There was something in his tone, a quiet ache, the kind of loneliness Emily knew all too well. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house felt heavy with silence, broken only by the ticking clock. Emily finished taping the bandage and looked up at him. "There, that should help. But you should avoid chopping wood for a while." Mr. Carter chuckled lightly, the sound rusty from disuse. "Are you telling me I'm too old for it?" She grinned. I'm telling you, everyone needs help sometimes. Even tough veterans. He raised an eyebrow, surprised at her boldness. But instead of being offended, he smiled. A small, genuine smile that softened his entire face. As Emily packed the kit away, she said, "If you ever need groceries or medicine, I can help." "I'm around the neighborhood anyway." "You have to trouble yourself," he replied quickly. "It's not trouble," she said firmly. "Besides, you'd be helping me, too. My mom worries that I don't spend enough time doing good things for people." That seemed to catch him off guard. For a man used to being left alone, the idea that someone wanted to spend time with him felt almost foreign. He hesitated, then nodded. "Well, if you insist. My name is Raymond." "Raymond Carter." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand. He looked at her for a long moment before shaking it with his bandaged one. "And you are?" Emily Parker." Their handshake lingered longer than either expected. For Raymond, it was the first human connection he'd felt in years. For Emily, it was the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. When she left his house that evening, the porch light glowed warmly behind her. She glanced back once, noticing Mr. Carter still sitting by the window, watching her walk away. For the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel invisible. And for Emily, that old, lonely house on Maplewood Street didn't seem so lonely anymore. The following week, Emily found herself pausing outside the weathered gate of the Carter house more than once. At first she hesitated, unsure if she was intruding. After all, Mr. Carter hadn't asked her to return, but there was something about the way he had looked at her. When she left that night, not desperate, but quietly hopeful, that tugged at her heart. On Tuesday afternoon, with a grocery bag in her hand and the October air carrying the smell of fallen leaves, she finally pushed the gate open. The creak of the rusty hinges echoed across the yard. Mr. Carter was on the porch, sitting in his wooden chair with a blanket across his lap. His bandaged hand rested on the armrest. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something softer. "Back again?" he said, raising an eyebrow. Emily held up the bag. "I brought tea and some muffins from the cafe. Thought maybe we could share." For a moment he looked as though he might refuse, the way older men sometimes do out of pride. But then he nodded and motioned toward the door. "All right, come inside. Haven't had company in a long time." Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and old books. Emily followed him into the kitchen, where she unpacked the tea bags and muffins. Mr. Carter pulled out a chipped porcelain teapot, one clearly older than she was, and set it on the stove. As water boiled, she glanced around. The kitchen walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the pattern of tiny blue flowers worn almost invisible. On the fridge were yellowed photographs held up by magnets, children at Christmas. A woman stirring something at the stove, a dog with floppy ears. "That's my wife, Martha," he said, noticing her eyes on the pictures. "She passed away 12 years ago, cancer." "I'm sorry," Emily said quietly. He nodded. She was the kind of woman who lit up a room without trying. I've been chasing the echo of her laugh ever since she left. Emily didn't know what to say, so she set the mugs on the table and poured hot water over the tea bags. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the gentle fragrance of chamomile. They sat across from each other. For a while, neither spoke, sipping their tea in silence. But silence with Mr. Carter didn't feel awkward. It felt restful, like the quiet of a library. Finally, Emily broke it. "You said you'd been through worse than a cut on your hand. Were you in the military?" "Yes," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Vietnam War. I enlisted when I was 19. Thought I'd be invincible." He gave a short laugh. "Turns out nobody is." Emily's eyes widened. She'd read about the war in textbooks, but sitting across from someone who had actually been there was different. "Was it hard?" Carter's expression changed. His gaze drifted past her as if staring at memories only he could see. "Hard is one word. Terrifying is another. We were boys thrown into something far bigger than us. We lost friends, saw things no one should see. And when we came back," he paused. "Not everyone welcomed us. People saw uniforms, not the boys inside them." Emily swallowed. "That sounds lonely." "It was," he admitted. "But then Martha was there. She didn't care about politics. She just cared about me. She pulled me back from the edge more times than I can count." His voice broke slightly on the last words, and Emily's chest tightened. She reached across the table, gently touching the edge of his mug. She must have loved you a lot. He smiled faintly. More than I deserved. Emily wanted to change the heaviness in the air, so she said, My mom is sick. Heart condition. That's why I work so much. It's just her and me. My dad, well, he left when I was little. I don't even remember him much. For the first time, Mr. Carter looked at her not just as a helpful neighbor, but as someone carrying her own battles. His eyes softened. That's a lot for someone your age. Emily shrugged, trying to hide how much it weighed on her. You do what you have to do. But sometimes it feels like there's no one to lean on. Mr. Carter leaned forward, his hands clasped together. You're stronger than you think. Emily, life throws storms at you. But storms also shape the strongest trees. She let his words settle into her, feeling them root deep. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her that way. Not as a child, not as a student, but as someone capable of bearing real weight. The conversation stretched on. He told her about growing up in a small farming town, sneaking into movies for a dime, and driving his father's old pickup truck down dusty roads. He spoke of the first time he saw Martha, standing outside a diner with the wind tugging at her hair. His eyes lit up as he described her smile, and Emily felt as if she'd been invited into a secret, sacred memory. In return, she told him about her classes, how she wanted to study English, literature, but worried about affording university, how she loved writing, but never showed anyone her work. Mr. Carter listened intently, nodding, occasionally offering advice, but never interrupting. Hours passed unnoticed until the clock struck 6. Emily stood reluctantly, realizing she had promised her mother she'd be home for dinner. I should go, she said, gathering her bag. Mr. Carter rose with her, walking her to the door. Emily, he began, hesitating. Thank you. For the tea. For listening. For showing up. She smiled. You don't have to thank me. I like being here. As she stepped onto the porch, he added quietly, You remind me of my daughter. She used to sit right there at the table and tell me about her dreams. Carter's expression changed. His gaze drifted past her as if staring at memories only he could see. Hard is one word. Terrifying is another. We were boys thrown into something far bigger than us. We lost friends, saw things no one should see. And when we came back, he paused. Not everyone welcomed us. People saw uniforms, not the boys inside them. Emily swallowed. That sounds lonely. It was, he admitted. But then Martha was there. She didn't care about politics. She just cared about me. She pulled me back from the edge more times than I can count. His voice broke slightly on the last words, and Emily's chest tightened. She reached across the table, gently touching the edge of his mug. She must have loved you a lot. He smiled faintly. More than I deserved. Emily wanted to change the heaviness in the air, so she said, My mom is sick. Heart condition. That's why I work so much. It's just her and me. My dad, well, he left when I was little. I don't even remember him much. For the first time, Mr. Carter looked at her not just as a helpful neighbor, but as someone carrying her own battles. His eyes softened. That's a lot for someone your age. Emily shrugged, trying to hide how much it weighed on her. You do what you have to do. But sometimes it feels like there's no one to lean on. Mr. Carter leaned forward, his hands clasped together. You're stronger than you think. Emily, life throws storms at you. But storms also shape the strongest trees. She let his words settle into her, feeling them root deep. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to her that way. Not as a child, not as a student, but as someone capable of bearing real weight. The conversation stretched on. He told her about growing up in a small farming town, sneaking into movies for a dime, and driving his father's old pickup truck down dusty roads. He spoke of the first time he saw Martha, standing outside a diner with the wind tugging at her hair. His eyes lit up as he described her smile, and Emily felt as if she'd been invited into a secret, sacred memory. She told him about her classes, how she wanted to study English, literature, but worried about affording university, how she loved vice but never interrupting. Hours passed unnoticed until the clock struck 6. Emily stood reluctantly, realizing she had promised her mother she'd be home for dinner. I should go, she said, gathering her bag. Mr. Carter rose with her, walking her to the door. Emily, he began, hesitating. Thank you. for the tea, for listening, for showing up. She smiled. You don't have to thank me. I like being here. As she stepped onto the porch, he added quietly, You remind me of my daughter. She used to sit right there at the table and tell me about her dreams. Emily paused, her chest aching. Then maybe I'll sit there more often. Mr. Carter's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. I'd like that. The sun had dipped low, casting the street in golden light as Emily walked away. She glanced back once and saw him still standing on the porch, watching her go, not with the loneliness she'd seen before, but with something warmer, something like hope. That evening, as Emily helped her mother prepare dinner, her thoughts kept drifting back to the old man in the house on the corner. For the first time in a long while, she felt as though she'd found a place where her own. Loneliness wasn't quite so heavy, and for Raymond Carter, the silence of his house no longer seemed so suffocating. There was someone who might return tomorrow, someone who might share tea again. For both of them, it was the beginning of something unexpected, a bridge across generations, built one conversation at a time. Sessions, Emily learned more than just history. She learned resilience. She learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving despite it. And Mr. Carter, in turn, learned something too, that even in his twilight years, his life still had value, still had an audience. One evening in February, snowflakes fell thick outside as Emily sat curled in an armchair, her notebook open. Mr. Carter leaned back in his recliner, watching her scribble. You know, he said suddenly, you remind me of myself at your age. Emily laughed. Me? I can't picture you as a 21-year-old college kid. Not in looks, he chuckled. In spirit, I see that same hunger to do something meaningful, to leave a mark. His expression turned serious. Don't ever let anyone tell you that your dreams aren't worth chasing. She bit her lip. I want to write. Books, maybe even teach someday. But it feels impossible with money so tight. Half the time I'm just trying to keep the lights on at home. Mr. Carter leaned forward. Emily, you've already got what most writers spend their lives chasing. Eyes that see deeper than the surface. Ears that truly listen. Don't throw that away. His words settled into her like seeds planted in fertile soil. She would remember them for years to come. As winter gave way to spring, Emily's notebook filled steadily. Pages brimmed with stories of sacrifice, love, and lessons carved by hardship. The act of writing them down was transforming her, too. She noticed her essays for class carried more weight, her professors praising her insight. For the first time, she felt as though her words might actually matter. Their bond grew beyond stories. Emily began cooking meals for Mr. Carter, laughing when he teased her about her heavy hand with salt. He, in turn, taught her to fix small things around the house, a leaky faucet, a squeaky hinge. They planted flowers in the front yard together, the sight of them making the lonely house less forbidding to passers-by. But not everyone understood. One afternoon, Emily ran into a classmate at the grocery store. When she mentioned she was buying things for Mr. Carter, the girl gave her a puzzled look. You spend that much time with some old guy? Don't you ever want to just hang out with people your own age? Emily smiled politely but didn't bother to explain. How could she? How could she describe the peace of those quiet afternoons? The way the weight of her own struggles lifted when she listened to him, or the way his eyes lit up when she walked in the door. For Mr. Carter, too, life was changing. Where once he had dreaded mornings, now he looked forward to them, knowing Emily might come by. He even started attending the occasional town event again, encouraged by her. Neighbors whispered less now, realizing the connection between them was genuine, not odd, but beautiful. April evening, Emily closed the notebook after another long session. You know, Mr. Carter, this could be a book one day. People need to hear your story. He chuckled, shaking his head. No one wants to read about an old man's life. I do, she said firmly. And if I do, others will too. He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Maybe it's not about whether they read it. Maybe it's about passing it on to someone who cares. And I think I've already done that. Emily's chest tightened. She looked at him, at his silver hair, his lined face, the warmth in his eyes, and realized he had become something more than a neighbor, more than even a mentor. He had become family, and though neither said it out loud, both understood. The bridge between them was built strong, enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. By the time summer rolled around, the roses Emily and Mr. Carter had planted were blooming in full color. The once lonely house on Maplewood Street no longer looked forgotten. The porch railings had been painted fresh white, the yard neatly trimmed. Neighbors paused when they walked by, surprised by the change. It wasn't just the house that looked different. It was Raymond Carter himself. Though his hair was whiter and his steps slower, there was a light in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. He laughed more easily now, teased Emily about her clumsy gardening, and even started writing little notes in her leather-bound notebook when she wasn't around. But beneath the warmth, time was still working its quiet erosion. By August, his strength began to fade. Climbing the stairs left him breathless. He sometimes lost his train of thought mid-sentence. His doctor had warned him that his heart was weakening. But he didn't speak much of it to Emily. She noticed, of course. She saw how his hands trembled when he tried to pour tea, how his voice faltered when he grew tired. She began stopping by every day instead of a few times a week. She cooked, cleaned, read aloud to him when his eyes grew heavy. She insisted on calling his doctor when he resisted. "You don't have to do all this." "Emily," he told her one evening, his voice gentle but firm. "Yes, I do," she replied without hesitation. "You took care of everyone else your whole life. Someone should take care of you." He didn't argue after that. Instead, he simply held her gaze and whispered, "You're the daughter I always wished lived closer." The words lodged deep in her chest, filling the void her absent father had left. She blinked away tears and smiled. "Then you're the father I never really had." Their bond, already strong, became unshakable. Emily began writing late into the nights, shaping his stories into chapters. Sometimes she read them aloud, and he would close his eyes, listening as if hearing his own life for the first time. "You've given me a voice again," he told her. By early September, the weather turned cooler. The days grew shorter, the light golden in the evenings. Mr. Carter's health declined rapidly. He spent more time in bed, the leather notebook resting on his nightstand like a trusted friend. One crisp morning, Emily let herself into the house with the spare key he had given her months ago. The air inside was still heavy with quiet. She found him sitting in his armchair by the window, a blanket draped across his knees, watching the sunrise. His face was pale, but his eyes were awake, alert. "Good morning," she said softly, setting down the basket of fruit she had brought. He turned his head slowly, smiling faintly. "Morning, Emily." She knelt beside him, adjusting the blanket. "How are you feeling today?" "Like my body's running out of fuel," he admitted with a dry chuckle. "But don't look so sad. I've had more mornings than most men. This one feels final, but also right." Her throat tightened. "Don't say that, Emily," he said gently, resting his frail hand over hers. "We both know the truth. I can feel it, but it doesn't scare me. Not anymore." Tears burned her eyes, but she tried to smile for him. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yes," he whispered. "Read to me." "Read what you've written." She opened the notebook to the first chapter and began. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she continued. She read about his boyhood in Ohio, about the war, about the love story between him and Martha. As the words filled the room, Mr. Carter closed his eyes, his breathing slow but even. When she finished, he squeezed her hand. "You've given me immortality, Emily. Long after I'm gone, my story will live. And so will our friendship." Her tears spilled then, silently sliding down her cheeks. "You're not just a story to me. You're family." He smiled weakly. "And you've been my new dawn. Emily, you brought light back when I thought my days were only shadows." The sun climbed higher, casting golden beams across the floorboards. Mr. Carter's eyes fluttered closed. His hand, still clasping hers, loosened gradually. Emily sat perfectly still, holding his hand as his breathing slowed, then quieted, until the room was filled only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Raymond Carter was gone. For a long while, Emily remained there, her forehead resting against his hand. The grief was sharp, but beneath it was gratitude. Gratitude that she had known him, that she had shared these months with him, that she had been there to make sure he wasn't alone in his final moment. Days later, the neighborhood gathered for his funeral. Veterans from the local post stood in solemn salute, their uniforms crisp. The pastor spoke of a man who had served his country, who had loved his family, who had endured much. But Emily, when it was her turn, spoke of something more. She stood at the podium, voice trembling but clear. Mr. Carter was more than a veteran, more than a neighbor. He was a friend, a mentor, a father figure. He taught me that life is measured not by years, but by the love you give and the connections you build. He gave me wisdom, laughter, and kindness. And in return, I hope I gave him comfort. There wasn't a dry eye in the church. Months passed. Emily kept writing. She polished the chapters, added her own reflections, and eventually sent the manuscript to a small publisher. To her astonishment, they agreed to print it. The book was released the following year under the title, A New Dawn, The Life of Raymond Carter. Dedication page, she wrote, "To the man who showed me that even in the twilight of life, the sun can rise again. Thank you for being my light." The book found readers far beyond Maplewood. Letters poured in from strangers who said Mr. Carter's story reminded them of their fathers, their grandfathers, their own forgotten heroes. His life, once confined to a quiet house on a corner street, now reached countless hearts. And Emily, no longer the girl who only hurried past that lonely house, carried his lessons with her into everything she did. She pursued her studies, she kept writing, and she made it her mission to visit other elderly neighbors, determined that no one should face their last days alone. Every morning, as sunlight broke across the horizon, Emily thought of him. Of that last morning, of his hand in hers, of the wisdom he had left behind. And though he was gone, she felt him still, in the roses blooming in the yard, in the words inked on paper, in the steady strength he had passed to her. The lonely house on Maplewood was no longer lonely. It had become a place of memory, of legacy, of love. For Raymond Carter, there had been one last dawn. For Emily Parker, there would be many more, each one carrying a piece of him.